I'm Mike O'Toole, and this is the Unconventionals. Welcome to Season 3 of the Unconventionals. As in previous seasons, we have some great conversations with disruptive brands. From small companies like Story, based in Chelsea and New York, that's reinventing the notion of what's possible in retail, to one of the world's largest brands, American Express, talking specifically about Small Business Saturday, which has become much more a cultural movement than a marketing campaign. But we're also mixing it up this season by adding some theme-based episodes. Over our conversations with unconventional companies in the first couple of seasons, while each story's been different, some common themes started to emerge. We noticed that there were certain business practices, some of the basic conventional wisdom about marketing or running a company, that these companies were ignoring or even overturning. So we thought this was pretty interesting, and we wanted to go deeper on it. My partner in crime for these theme-based shows will be David Rogers from Columbia Business School. David's a great thinker on marketing, branding, and technology, and together we'll discuss the conventional wisdom and investigate how certain companies are building value by doing things a different way. Today's theme: if you can't count it, it doesn't count. So I'm here with David Rogers, Director of the Center for Global Brand Leadership at Columbia. Hey, David.
Hey, Mike. Glad to be back.
Yeah, and so we're taking on business conventions here, and the one that I'd like to focus on has to do with traditional notions of accountability and return.
Right.
And I think it's, for me, it's the thing that was drummed into me at business school from almost the first day, which is, if you can't count it, it doesn't count.
Interesting. And I think business schools are trying to maybe undo some of the damage they've done on this point. Let me quote with a non-management theorist. Albert Einstein said that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So I think business schools are trying to figure out that balance between the importance of measurability and accountability, and also some really important countervailing values. One is sort of long-term views versus short-term measurements, and there's a need for both. And the other is that there are some things that are really important to manage, and that contrary to conventional wisdom, sometimes you can manage things without measuring them.
But quarterly return's important, right? So, if businesses exist to drive return for shareholders.
Quarterly returns are too slow in some cases. We need indicators and measures in managing a business which are increasingly on real time, short cycles. You need to report to your shareholders. Quarterly makes perfect sense. But that can't be the only factor by which you are making all your decisions.
So what else? So longer term measures you mentioned?
Longer term is definitely part of it. And businesses, whether it's somebody like Amazon and Jeff Bezos' strategy, which has been to plow every single bit of profit he gets back into growing the business.
Yeah, people get frustrated with his lack of profitability, right?
Exactly. But the revenues keep growing, and he keeps holding on to enough investors that the company has a tremendous PE ratio. So he's very much a business leader who's focused on the long term. But it's not just the Silicon Valley types. I was talking with a French company that's over 300 years old recently in a traditional B2B sector, and they're very focused on the long term. They're very focused on the customer. They say, well, we can't afford to simply be focused on what's our quarterly profit and our margin on every single decision. It's also, where do we want to be 1 year, 2 year, 5 years out?
It's interesting. We've heard this theme from some of our unconventional interviews as well. Not surprisingly, some of these disruptive companies are thinking more broadly than just about shareholder return. Big Ass Fans, in particular, has, for a company its size and in its market, extraordinary long-term view. So let's listen to Kerry Smith a little bit, and we can see what he has to say.
I do have sympathy with people that are forced to a number. I really, really do. It's not fair. It's easy for me to say, well, you shouldn't do that because I don't have to do it. So, but it's different for other companies. I think that maybe it starts out simply. Maybe it starts out by recognizing or accepting the fact that there's more to life than making the quarter. There's more to life than taking your startup company and going and getting $2 million from a VC or a PE. There's more to life than just cashing that check. There's more to life than that. and that building a company gives you an opportunity to develop meaning for not only yourself, but for a large number of people. When you start thinking in those terms, when you start thinking that we're trying to build a company that's going to be not just for this generation or the next generation or the next generation, you have to think about things in a different way. And it alters the way you look at things. And the last thing you're going to be concerned about is profit quarter to quarter. That's just not something that's going to occur.
So, David, you just talked about the 300-year vision of this French company. Carrie's got a 200-year vision for big ass fans, and I have to believe there's no one else in his category thinking that way.
Yeah, I think that's pretty unique. And the other thing is that he's talking about different stakeholders. Who he's trying to serve. This idea of creating meaning through a business institution and serving the employees, serving the community. As I think a big distinction as well.
If there's new measures, broader measures, it's not just about a longer time horizon. It's also about looking more broadly at stakeholders. So the shareholder is one critical stakeholder in the business.
Absolutely.
For sure, but there are other people to be concerned about.
There are, and that's a big shift in thinking of business leaders, and including it with publicly held companies. There was a very interesting meeting with shareholders for Apple recently, and Tim Cook, the CEO, was talking about some of their efforts around environmental impact and accessibility, and there was an activist shareholder group who said, well, tell us what's the ROI? What are we getting back financially from this initiative? And Tim Cook said, when we're working on making our devices accessible for the blind, I'm not focused on the bloody ROI, was his phrase, I think.
And that shut up the activist, I imagine.
I think so. He said, if you're not happy with that, you should get out of the stock. And he's in a position that they've built enough value with a company that is looking at broader measures, broader sources of value, that they've got plenty of people who want to invest in it.
That's a powerful story. And on one hand, though, I might say Apple's the exception that proves the rule. Because people love to talk about Apple because Apple is unique. Apple's powerful. Apple is icon. But it's you take that and then you bring the big ass fan story in it. Mid-sized manufacturer based in Lexington, Kentucky.
Absolutely, and the whole renewed focus on corporate social responsibility, and companies are realizing this isn't just about spending a little bit of money for reputational benefit. It really is about seeing multiple stakeholders and how serving different societal stakeholders in addition to your shareholders ultimately positions your company for better long-term growth and value to those shareholders.
So I heard this echoed too when I talked to Neil Blumenthal at Warby Parker. He definitely thinks broadly in terms of his mission and vision and
very
his
much a
stakeholders.
Multi-stakeholder company from the beginning with their whole business model and the idea of that you're buying the products, sort of like the Tom shoes. You're buying the products and you're also helping people who don't have access to, in that case, eyewear with Warby Parker to get access to it around the world.
Right. So let's listen to Neil talk about his vision for Warby Parker.
We think about this in terms of the mission and what do we want to accomplish and why do we wake up and get excited to come to work every morning. And if you ask anybody here in the office, it's really two things. One is we want to radically transform the optical industry and transfer billions of dollars from the Luxotticas of the world to normal people. And the second is to build an example of a business that is scalable, profitable, but does good in the world and doesn't charge a premium for it. Right? We think that that's a powerful idea, and we need more examples of this so that way more entrepreneurs create businesses in this model and that more Fortune 500 executives sort of steer their companies in this direction, because ultimately businesses can be and should be a catalyst for good.
So I'll start by saying I love Warby Parker. I have Warby Parker glasses. It's a great brand. But isn't it, like, if I'm skeptical here for a second, isn't that an awful lot for a startup to take on? Transforming the eyewear industry, creating a new model for how businesses should operate.
Why start a new business if you're not going to try to do something new? I think the audacity of their vision is why Warby Parker is really a brand and not just a new, website.
Yeah.
Not something that Amazon snapped up after a couple quarters after they turned a profit and said, okay, that's a good way to sell a new product category.
Well, the other thing that you had mentioned, David, is that customers actually care about this. They want to have more visibility.
Absolutely. I mean, the kind of thing that Neil is talking about is really important to consumers. And as we talk about the sort of shift of values around the sort of millennial generation, this really is important to brands, and not even just in the U.S. and developed markets. Amazing surveys I've seen looking at markets like India, the same kind of patterns are happening, and people are really looking to our business institutions to serve multiple purposes and to create value exactly in the kind of lines that Neil's talking about.
Well, so there's that big shift maybe in consumer mentality, but also from Warby Parker's perspective. Neil makes the point that it's not these values instead of revenue and instead of success.
Absolutely.
It's these values in service of those goals or consistent with those goals. In fact, they, as you know, David, their annual report is unlike any other company's annual report. It's a report out against their value to multiple stakeholders.
Right.
So they talk about the buy one, give one program where they give away glasses, one pair of glasses in the developing world for everyone sold. And he said that when they released that first annual report, it was their highest sales volume day for their glasses. So
this is not, it's not the sort of doing good as a cost center. It's like, well, we've decided we're going to spend a little money and we're just going to park some of our profits each quarter in this this box that we call, doing well for society. It's really part of how the business grows.
There's the customer as a stakeholder. There's the sense of giving back as part of his mission. Right. There's also the employees. I think Neil talks a lot about hey,
that's a critical point. This really makes a difference in terms of employee engagement, and that matters for attracting the right kind of employees and retaining them. This is. With a company like this, you're really trying to get very talented employees who are looking at a lot of other options and companies and brands. And this kind of sense that the company is doing something and you are held accountable to something other than just a single stakeholder, just the shareholder return, makes a big difference.
So if you can't count it, it doesn't count. It feels like we all need to look at it more broadly than that. And what was the Einstein quote? I sort of like his version better.
Einstein said that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And I think that's true. And when you look at management these days, it is important. It really is a fallacy that the idea that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, which is often attributed to Peter Drucker, although I don't believe he actually said it. Because look at what all these companies we're talking about are doing. They are managing around ideas about social return. They're managing around ideas around customer experience. They're managing around, in some cases, an aesthetic, something very qualitative. And with the right leadership and the right culture, leaders can manage around that, even if you aren't putting a number to it. So it's really where management thinking is going is how do you mix these things that are easily measured, and how do you manage through things like building and instilling corporate culture around these really important values that are a little harder to put a number to.
Well, and also to me, and we talked about this, it's about intent. A lot of the companies we've talked to, they've set out to do something very different and audacious. And I think they've looked for ways to measure against all of those objectives, including what they're passionate about, including how they're trying to change the world, as opposed to accept the one that their accountant tells them to look at solely. And I think that's what makes them interesting.
Absolutely. And that's why we'll keep watching them.
David, thanks again. It was a great conversation.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
Next time on The Unconventionals, we'll be talking with Rachel Sheckman from Story, the New York retailer that is a mashup of store, magazine, and art gallery. The Unconventionals is written and produced with my partner, Reed Mangan. Post-production and technical direction by Reed Mangan with Emmanuel Ording and Anthony Gentles. Promotion and distribution by Greg Strafface and Graham Spector with Tori O'Neill. Our creative director is Aaron De Silva. Our executive producer is Phil Johnson for PJA Advertising and Marketing. I'm Mike O'Toole. Thanks again to David Rogers. And to hear more episodes of The Unconventionals, visit pjaradio.com. We're always on the hunt for great stories. If you have ideas or feedback, please let us know at our Facebook page, facebook.com/unconventionalsradio.